So this is going to be a very condensed live. It's not going to be a call-in show. We're going to get right to the nitty-gritty of it. This is not going to be me talking and talking about, the potential hypotheticals. I want to tackle a couple of things in this video very quickly. And this is stemming from the fact that I played basketball yesterday with someone who suggested that we sign a certain player, and I was just like, how? How are you getting to that point? And it occurred to me that we really haven't talked about free agency. We haven't talked about anything other than how much we like Fred or how much we like Gary. But who are the teams that actually have the cap space? Who are the teams that can actually sign these guys? Who are the competitive offers going to come from? What is the Raptors cap sheet looking like? I want to talk about all of that. And we want to dig into who are the realistic targets, because obviously whatever happened for this team this year, we're looking to get better. And you're not going to tell me that the only thing this Raptors front office is looking at is this 13th overall pick. So I want to look at who are those free agents. So if Fred is the top free agent, is he the eighth best free agent? What about the center market? Let's look at the center market. How many centers are actually on the market? We're going to break it down. Big shout out to Spot Track for, and Keith Smith over at NBA Front Office and Spot Track for putting this list together. We're going to break it down very quickly. Also, I'm going to look at potential options in terms of how the cap situation changes based on decisions the Raptors make. So first of all, welcome. Hey all, how are you guys doing? Who's the best buy low candidate? Afternoon. I'm excited about draft shows. James says he's excited about draft shows. All right. Let's get into it. So let's start with where the Raptors are. So we'll start there. We'll start with what the Raptors cap situation is. We'll talk about potential of bringing those players back. Let me know. You guys want to start with who the best free agents are out there, or do you want to start with where the Raptors are? I agree. Austin Reeves has been awesome. Come get Miles Turner. He's for sale. Okay. In the favor of keeping this condensed, let us start with this. This is where the Raptors are. Now, this might be a little bit hard to see, and I promise it's going to get a little bit bigger from there. But, to those of you who just want a basic, where are the Raptors in terms of who's a free agent, who's not, you'll look at Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. there. They are going to be obviously in player option deals. They have very little incentive to opt into those player options unless their market is absolutely tarnished. And I see no reason that they would. So most likely they are going to be declining those player options and becoming free agents. They will become unrestricted free agents the minute they resign, but the Raptors have their bird rights and they can sign them. To take a look at the cap holds, this is the cap hold situation for the Raptors. I do expect Ron Harper Jr. and Jeff Doughton to be back with this club. Maybe Jeff Doughton on a fully converted, minimum deal. Ron Harper probably for another two-way. Will Barton will probably be gone. Delano Banton, where is he? I think they believe in him long term. I think you could keep him for sure. That first round pick, man, I hope that's not the casualty. But if the Raptors move up in the draft, that's going to actually present another complication for the Toronto Raptors, because as you move up in the draft, as we know, that cap hold becomes higher and the salary for that player is going to become higher. And as I'm going to show you very quickly, the Raptors are going to find themselves in luxury tax hell very quickly. So first of all, just take a look at the player salaries, right? The one caveat here, the two caveats that we haven't really talked about are Thaddeus Young and Otto Porter Jr. Thaddeus Young, if he is waived before June 30th, if I'm not mistaken, June 30th or July 30th, he is only due $1 million next year. That becomes dead cap space. And Otto Porter Jr. does have a player option. He only played 8 games this year, so very likely he is going to be opting into that player option. Unless, of course, he has some sort of guaranteed security somewhere else. I doubt it. He is approaching, 30, 31 years old. I don't see a huge market for him out there. So this is a player who could opt in. And then, if the Raptors are really desperate to get him out, which I don't see why they would be unless they have some sort of idea that he's not going to be healthy to start next year, then, potentially that could be also a trade piece, and we'll explore that. So first, let's look at cap hell. So this is a situation in which you re-signed Fred and Gary, you re-signed the 13th over, you signed the 13th overall pick. Delano goes to a minimum, Jeff goes to a minimum, and you re-sign Jakob Poeltl. Now, this is with expected value on those contracts on the low end. Okay. Fred VanVleet, 29.39, Gary Trent, 21.44. I think these are very realistically, I think these are offers that these players would actually accept. Jakob at 18.339. In this situation, obviously Thaddeus Young has been waived. I have Ron Harper here as a cap waive because I accidentally signed him and then had to waive him. But anyways, the point is the Raptors would be in the tax, it would be heavily in the tax here, right? So they are 12 million over the tax threshold here. Their tax bill is, of course, $23 million. Is this a team that's willing to go into the tax for a team that didn't even make the play-in? I doubt it. There's also an additional complication here, which is you have 15 roster spots here, but you haven't really added anyone. You haven't used you wouldn't use, in this case, to go over the cap, to go over the tax, you wouldn't be able to use your mid-level exception because you wouldn't have it because you'd be a tax-paying team. And then on top of that, you wouldn't have your taxpayer mid-level because then it would further put you into the tax hell that you're already in. And then, of course, there's repeater tax. So naturally, if you end up in tax, there's always a possibility to do some tax cleaning so that you get under the tax. But again, I find it very hard to believe that MLSE would pay tax here. So in this situation, if you end up in this situation, I think the most obvious thing, and it wouldn't even get you all the way out, would be to buy out Otto Porter. And again, are you a good team if you do that, right? I mean, I would argue that he's a big part of, potentially shoring up your bench depth next year. So you are really, really taking a chance here. And this becomes further complicated down the line because you start talking about big value contracts for Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, right? Like Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., if these guys take these contracts go up the following year. Now, naturally, there's a bit of a cap boom the following year and the year after that. And, slowly, gradually, we'll see that go up. But still, even if the cap starts to trend closer to 170, you still be capped out completely. And you start edging closer and closer to that luxury tax payment. Not to mention, Pascal Siakam will be owed more than $37 million at some point, and OG Anunoby is due for a big raise. Not to mention the biggest raise on your books will be Scotty Barnes in 2 years. Now, he will be probably commanding a max contract, at which point you would have to time out all of these contracts, and you can't be in a situation where you have overlaps, because at that point you have to basically get off of draft picks in order to get rid of those guys, because everyone knows you're not going to pay $220 million for this contract, for this roster, right? Like, everyone understands that. So you end up in a pretty precarious situation here. Not to mention, Precious Achiuwa is going to be due for a new contract at some point in 2 years. Christian Koloko is going to be due for a new contract. So if you're the Raptors, really at this point, you have a really strong incentive for short-term contracts on higher value or backloaded contracts. So you could easily go the other way in terms of, wanting to front load Fred's contract this year, so you pay him the most you can this year, but you're still in the tax, right? You're still a tax-paying team. You bring these three guys. Now, let's just say these guys become very altruistic, their market softens, and we'll see, what the competitive offers are. I assure you, there aren't like big-time teams with cap space out there. There are 7 teams that we'll discuss, but let's consider more conservatively, what those cap figures could be for those guys. So Fred VanVleet, we move him down from 29 to 26, which is rumored to be what the Raptors want to sign him for. Gary Trent Jr., it's a modest increase on his player option of about $1 million. Does he want to come back? That is another question for another day, but, granted, you could give him terms here. You could give him a 2+1. You can give him a 1+1, sort of a bet on yourself contract. The Raptors have sort of given him already a bet on yourself contract, which is the one that he is set to opt out of right now. And of course, this presents the big elephant in the room here is, how can you now afford to sign OG Anunoby? Even here, you are a taxpayer team, right? Even with Jakob Poeltl taking $16.9 million, you become a tax-paying team. So while the Raptors did do some cap cleaning, technically with Khem Birch and moving his contract over to San Antonio, the very fact that you take on Jakob Poeltl and now have to sign him up for this bigger contract, in my opinion, negates that by $10 million. You were already very pressed. There were a lot of people who were worried before the Jakob Poeltl trade. How are you affording all of these players, especially if Pascal Siakam ends up with the Supermax? Now, you would be very happy to know that I have looked at the ballots, and it looks like Pascal Siakam is probably not going to be an All NBA player. So you can dismiss that Supermax idea out of your head, which would have had him closer to $50 million within 2 years. So let's move him down. Let's just say, what is the realistic way out of this so that the Raptors can actually, have some wiggle room under the tax line? Well, the obvious thing, would be to not bring back one of these three players, right? Not bring back Gary, or not bring back Fred, or not bring back Jakob. I think Jakob, given the fact that you traded for him very recently, you gave up multiple picks for him, most likely in every scenario that I looked at, I signed him back, because I think there's no way in hell from a PR standpoint that you're not going to sign him back. And he actually, he fits with your roster a little bit, and, he was a good player for you. Gary Trent Jr., just not re-signing him, just the simple act of not re-signing Gary Trent Jr. pretty much solves all your problems for now. It doesn't solve your problems long term, because if you give Fred VanVleet what he wants, which is a 4-year contract, then his contract extension, or his new contract, especially if it is backloaded, would then overlap with Siakam's raise, OG's raise, and and Jakob's raise, and Scotty's raise. So all of those raises come into, you basically have your entire cap space devoted to like 4 players. Your minimum, your wiggle room between the cap and the tax would be devoted to your 5th player, and then the rest of your 6 main rotation players would all be minimum guys. You would really be in cap hell. I don't think MLSE is going to okay this, so it really does stand to reason that the Raptors will look to move off of one of these players, either by not re-signing them, which again doesn't solve all your problems because it's just a minimum thing, right? Gary Trent and Jakob Poeltl are basically one Pascal Siakam, right? You look at those two guys. Now, you could argue, they're worth less than one Pascal Siakam. That's debatable, right? But those two guys, getting rid of any one of those guys is not really going to solve your problems long term. Trading OG Anunoby and that pending, spike in his contract, that could solve your long-term problems, because now you're not going to be due to owe him, $30+ million on his next deal. So that's one way of looking at this. Obviously, Scotty's not going anywhere, in my opinion. There's another way to, clear some cap space, which is to trade Chris Boucher. Naturally, you'd be trading him to a team with cap space. Why would a team do this? And now we're going to look at the free agents that are available. And you don't really have pick compensation to be like sweetening the pot. So you would just be asking someone to, eat Chris Boucher's, 2 years remaining on his contract, or you'd be buying out Otto Porter. You can kind of see how this gets a little bit messy. Okay, so now that we've looked at that, not to, drag this on forever, let us take a look very quickly at, who the best free agents are. And we'll start by telling you like which teams actually have cap space this year. So the team with major cap space is ironically the team that is currently interviewing Ime Udoka. I believe they interviewed him yesterday, and that would be the Houston Rockets. They have a whole bunch of young players. Obviously, their cap space cannot be, leveraged towards long-term things, because they have, extensions. Also, they have to think about extensions for Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün. None of these guys are going to be necessarily cheap. And they're going to make significantly more than they're making right now. Eventually, they'll have to extend Jabari Smith Jr. So they can't like tie up like a 5-year salary, because they'll be in cap hell as well. So consider that 56 to 60 million that they have with, a bit of a grain of salt. Like they can sign guys up to like 3-year deals, but after that they would be, in trouble. There's the Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs, they cleared up a lot of space. They obviously tanked, after getting rid of Jakob Poeltl. They got rid of DeJounte Murray. So in two steps, they got rid of their 2 best players. And, they have $39 to $47 million. The Utah Jazz, the surprisingly, resurgent Utah Jazz. Now, they do have some players that they will need to re-sign, but they do have potentially $30 to $45 million. The Oklahoma City Thunder, who just made the play-in, congrats to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams. They will have, potentially Chet Holmgren coming back. He looks good. I saw some clips of him working out a couple of days ago. A friend sent it to me. He looks good. Like, he looks pretty healthy. And, if he can get, that's like, that's potentially, he might have gone top 4 in this draft. So They can get a couple of lottery picks in this year's draft. There's of course the Detroit Pistons. Dwayne Casey now moving on upstairs. They'll have a new coach, 27 million for them. The Indiana Pacers, who again at times this year were surprisingly, competitive. They have a really good culture. They have a really good coach. They have a really good star player in Tyrese Halliburton. I see them, being a player in free agency, right? They could potentially get up to $27 million under the cap. And then there's the Orlando Magic, the biggest threat for Fred VanVleet. They have a bit of a tricky situation because the article that I read, they have 19 to $58 million depending on who they waive and who they resign. They also have a pretty big free agent that they need to resign in Mo Wagner, and potentially resigning him will not be necessarily cheap. They may have an extra incentive to re-sign him because he is Franz's brother, and he was reasonably good for them this year. But they would have 58 million if they were to, I believe, if they were to let go, because I believe they have non-guaranteed contracts, kind of like what we have with Thaddeus Young. So with Jonathan Isaac, Markelle Fultz, and Bobo, and I can't read my own writing, but there's one more player that hasn't. It says Hardy, but I'm possible that's not it. What did I write here? Okay, so they have 4 players that they would need to waive, basically with non-guaranteed contracts. They also have draft picks coming in. So, all things considered, yeah. So there's your major players. Now let's take a look at the free agents. We'll start with point guards, go to shooting guards, small forwards, power forwards, centers. And, I'll be able to look at the chat here. So if there's anyone you want me to really expand on, be like, oh, what do you think about this person for the Raptors? By all means, message there. Okay, so we start with the point guards. Obviously, the all-star tier, Kyrie and Fred VanVleet. You can just hear me shaking my head with Fred VanVleet as a quote-unquote all-star tier point guard. But yes, technically his market value will potentially be higher than the guys in the next tier down. But sure, Fred VanVleet, he will be the top guy available. And of course, if you're a team out there that has trepidations about bringing in Kyrie Irving, even though he is the most talented point guard on the market by far, if the Dallas Mavericks re-sign him, which all indications are that they will, then Fred VanVleet becomes the top point guard on the market. Caveat, worth noting, there aren't a lot of teams out there that actually need a point guard. This is very important to realize. Roster depth is really important. You got to look at this from a perspective of who actually needs a starting point guard. We were thinking about this yesterday when we were talking. A friend of mine, who works for the Atlanta Hawks, and we were talking about like Trey Young potentials, right? Sorry, does not work for the Atlanta Hawks. Works covering the Atlanta Hawks, and we were talking about Trey Young destinations, and we're like, who actually needs Trey Young? Like, what team actually needs a starting point guard that doesn't have one that they would probably prefer over Trey Young? And we were drawing blanks. We got to like 3-4 teams. So yeah, there is a market for Fred VanVleet with these teams, but you look at the Pistons, right? Like the OKC Thunder are not gonna they're not gonna go for Fred VanVleet. I think the Utah Jazz, right? The Indiana Pacers, they have Tyrese Halliburton. Why would they do that, right? The Orlando Magic, I mean, I think they're really happy with Markelle Fultz, man. I think they're happy with how he sort of ended the season. I think it's just the Houston Rockets, the San Antonio Spurs, the Utah Jazz. I mean, it's really what you're looking at. The Detroit Pistons, maybe the Magic. So these are 5 sort of destinations. They all have cap space. They could all potentially give him his 26 million. But are they willing to pay him that much? So who are the Raptors really who are they? Like, I understand that he wants, 30. And they want to give him 26. I'm asking who would give him 22, 23, 24? Like, who's giving Fred VanVleet $24 million? I just want to know who is the competing offer. And if that competing offer is from the Houston Rockets, then let him go. You want to go to the Houston Rockets? You want to lose? You want to be in that situation? Fine. I would play hardball there and probably get myself fired there. But I just have to wonder, who are the competing offers from? Right? You consider the market for Gary Trent Jr., right? So we want to bring him back naturally, right? But who are we really, like, who are we competing against here? The Jazz, the Spurs, like, does he strike you as a guy who would be on any of these teams? I think it's just the Pistons, man. Like, the Pistons, would they want Gary Trent Jr.? Would they want a Jakob Poeltl? They just got James Wiseman, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like you got to look around at who actually has more than the mid-level. And I mean, you are significantly above the mid-level with some of these offers that we're talking about for these guys. And yeah, you don't want to piss anyone off or lowball them just because they don't have a huge market. But I mean, this is the nature of capitalism, right? So, anyways, moving on here. Patrick Beverley, Russell Westbrook. These are all nothing burgers. It kind of gives you an idea of just how weak the point guard class is. I think Gabe Vincent is pretty interesting. If the Raptors were to lose Fred VanVleet, now let's just say, contract negotiations break down. Right here in the rotation tier, maybe even sooner, you could start looking at mid-level exception guys, right? Like someone that you could look at to potentially replace them. Trey Jones is interesting. Javon Carter, Gabe Vincent, Ayo Dosunmu. Again, with Ayo and Trey Jones, they're both restricted free agents. Reggie Jackson, I don't think we want to go that route. Kobe White, the defense is a question mark. Dennis Smith Jr. And of course, there's Delano Banton, right, as a restricted free agent there. And, you could make an argument that he is one of the more intriguing, point guard-ish prospects on the lower end. Going further, we get DJ Augustine, Ishmael Wainwright, Jared Butler, Michael Carter Williams. I don't think we're JD Davidson's interesting, right? Matthew Dellavedova could be a depth piece, right? You like one of the things that I was looking at the other day was the analytics of championships, and one of the sort of so I just quickly sorry. Someone's saying Kobe White, please. Kobe White, please. Is that because he hit that one shot? So tomorrow, this video is coming out. It's called Scotty Barnes, Man on Fire, and it's like my review of Scotty for the year. And I'm just plugging it right now, so you guys will actually watch it tomorrow. But in it, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, we had assumed the entire, trade deadline that, and I had assumed, and perhaps, maybe incorrectly assumed, I don't know. I'm open to it, that the Raptors had made that move for Jakob Poeltl in order to get Fred and Pascal paid. And, the narrative makes sense, right? But it's also very important to get playoff experience. I know people don't necessarily give it all its due, right? But if you look at the charting models to predict NBA champions, future champions, one of the biggest predictors of championship success is actually playoff experience. And yeah, it may seem like a meme at this point. It may seem overrated, but yeah, it is important. So I look at a guy like Matthew Dellavedova as a third string point guard over someone like Malachi Flynn. And I'm like, yeah, Malachi has upside. Malachi has this and that. But Matthew Dellavedova has playoff experience. It's important, Obviously, Jeff Doughton Jr., I would put him higher than J.D. Davidson. I think this is criminally low for him, but, that's just me. George Hill, another guy with, playoff experience, right? So it's a lot of nothing burgers. Saban Lee, Raptors 905 legend right there. And Theo Maledon. You get an idea that the point guard class is not deep. Now, looking at shooting guards, obviously at the top of the tier, you have James Harden. He has a player option. He may decline. Not having the greatest playoffs so far. In terms of the next tier, the starter tier, you have Bruce Brown. Again, all of these guys could be, let's call it Gary Trent Jr. replacements. They'd be cheaper than Gary Trent, more than likely, right? Obviously, Gary Trent Jr. is on this list. He's in the starter tier list, and he is technically below Josh Hart, Jordan Clarkson, Bruce Brown, Austin Reeves. I think that Austin Reeves' explosion right now for the Lakers and his playoff success, if two teams had to pick, right, between, and look, the Lakers are pretty capped out, right? They're going to be capped out if they have to retain all of their guys, right? Someone could come along, one of these teams with, cap space could come along and sign Austin Reeves to a very big offer sheet. And you don't know if the Lakers are willing to, match that, right? So we will see how much Austin Reeves and Josh Hart, the way that they are playing right now is so impressive that I would argue there's a reason that they're both above Gary Trent Jr. right now. And same thing with Jordan Clarkson, right? So this may actually soften Gary's market to the point where he has a player option. He might have to opt in, because if the Raptors play hardball with him and they say, okay, go get yourself an offer sheet, we'll see, what it is. We obviously don't have a right to match, but just, feel the market out. If the Raptors know in advance that he is sixth among shooting guards, and the shooting guard class is not strong at all. This is not a strong class. Bruce Brown Jr., Jordan Clarkson, Josh Hart. This is not a strong shooting guard class. It's not, a litany of all-stars. So if they know beforehand that this is his market, they may actually play hardball with him and just say, okay, like, if you opt out, we'll give you long-term security. We'll give you like a 16 million type of deal. Maybe 18 million, right? But I don't see any reason why the Raptors go beyond 20 for the sixth rated, according to this list. Again, sixth rated. He's young. He's younger than a lot of these guys, but not by much, right? So I think it's important to put this into context. Um, Karis LeVert, another guy, depending on how you feel about these players. I mean, Karis LeVert, Gary Trent Jr., there's not a huge gap here. And again, being in the playoffs, guys like Malik Beasley, Dante DiVincenzo, right? Max Strus. My God, like, I mean, can you materially tell me that being in the playoffs versus not being in the playoffs, these guys are actually going to have like considerably lower market values than Gary Trent Jr.? He is in a very saturated market. Ditto for Seth Curry, right? Taylor Horton Tucker, I think he was okay. Matisse Thybulle here is interesting because, there was a time when Matisse was being talked about in a very different light, and now he's sort of fallen off. But worth noting, right, for the Portland Trailblazers, since getting over there, I believe he shot 38% from three. So all the, he doesn't shoot. I mean, he shot better than almost 95% of your roster this year. So, yeah, Victor Oladipo, the reclamation continues. Are there any guys that are just sort of sticking out here for you guys? Uh-oh. Yeah, man, he's not perfect. He is not perfect. But he is a sniper and he can get hot. Yeah, and they couldn't keep him, right? Yeah, man, he's not that good. Um, yeah, I've been hearing a lot about this. FA was messaging me about Bilal Koulibaly as well. Like I'm a little bit like I've watched a couple of games of his, mainly because I was focused on one of his, star teammates. But yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Um, Way too high. Hmm. Um, that depends on how you feel about his potential. I think he's one of the younger players in this, and people still put some stock into the Raptors scouting. Another Holiday, um, Javante Green, Damian Lee. I think these are all, kind of like, I don't know, wait to feel it out, see if they get an offer, sign them for a minimum type of guys. In terms of small forwards, probably the weakest. You have an aging Chris Middleton at the top. Then you have a probably highly overrated Kyle Kuzma. I think Cameron Johnson, I think is a little bit lower here, partially because he's a restricted free agent that always creates a sort of issue with tying up valuable cap space and valuable time, and somebody who, I don't see a way in hell that the Brooklyn Nets wouldn't match it unless someone goes way, way, way over on him. But he's gonna get paid for sure. Like he's, shooting gets paid. Dylan Brooks, an unrestricted free agent. That should be interesting. I don't want him. Herb Jones is going to get signed back up for sure. And then you have Jay Crowder, Kelly Oubre, um, Torrey Craig, Joe Ingles. I mean, again, like Yuta Watanabe, TJ Warren, Otto Porter will most likely opt in. Then you have, taking a flyer on someone like Cam Reddish, potentially. I mean, Cam Reddish is sort of burned out pretty much everywhere he's gone. Then you go into the power forwards, right? And here, I think putting Jeremy Grant this high up, I don't know. I would probably put Kristaps Porzingis above him. Um, but that's just me, and I would probably put them both above Draymond Green right now. But whatever, lists are subjective. But yeah, so those are the three quote unquote all-star tier guys, and then you have starter tier guys. I like Harrison Barnes, like if the Raptors, somehow were to get him as a mid-level exception, my God, like it would be amazing. But he is an unrestricted free agent. He's coming off a pretty solid year. You have Kenyon Martin Jr. Um, yeah, Grant Williams. Yeah, I put him on the list because I like him. I like him a lot. I think he's someone who could really do more with an expanded role. Um, Kind of fits a lot of shooting needs for the Raptors as a stretch big. Um, Yeah, but again, as a restricted free agent, the Celtics have bigger fish to fry than Grant Williams. Like, who knows how they actually feel about him. But I guess if somebody really wanted to come along and load him up with like a full, $12 million type of deal, I don't know how invested they are in keeping him, right? Um, but that should be interesting. I think he fits. He's a very portable player. I can't think of one of these players like the Spurs, Jazz, Rock. They could all use him, right? So I think he should be in demand as far as restricted free agency goes. Rui Hachimura, someone that I once called one of the worst players in the league, he's been really good since going to the Lakers. And again, you have Jeff Green, Jermichael Green, Dario Saric, Keita Bates-Diop. All of those are unrestricted free agents. Like a lot of those guys are probably looking at minimum contracts. Now, in terms of the centers, finally, this is the deepest position, in my opinion, in the league. Nikola Vucevic and Brook Lopez right up top, older guys, past 30, but I don't know. Yeah, like I think over 30, I think you could easily make a case that Jakob Poeltl, depending on how you feel about Brook Lopez at this age, you could make a case for Jakob Poeltl being like in that tier, right? Because when you offset it, his age, like so that's where I think, we're all assuming that Jakob might just be the guy who takes the biggest haircut because he just seems like a nice guy who would do that. But in terms of like the actual market, it's he and Fred that have the most bargaining leverage in terms of like, because, Burke might just go right back, right? And once these guys start signing back, like you look at the Rockets, do they have a need for a center? No. Do the Spurs have a need for a center? Ironically, bringing Jakob Poeltl back would be hilarious. Um, they do, actually, unless they get Victor Wembanyama. They definitely do. The Jazz, not really. OKC, definitely. The OKC Thunder absolutely have a need for a center next to a Chad Holmgren, who plays probably more power forward. And they have the shooting probably, with Isaiah Joe off the bench and, the wing depth. They might just have the shooting to compensate for a guy like, Jakob Poeltl. So, there's a possibility that one of these teams with a lot of cap space and a lot of young players can sort of backload a deal for Jakob Poeltl. If you play, hardball with him, like he could get an offer over 20 million. Do the Pacers have space for him? I don't know. I think they're set with Miles Turner. And the Magic, that would be interesting, right? Like, I don't think so. But, Jeff Weltman is a guy who was very, very, invested in Jakob Poeltl. Obviously, when he was here, he scouted him as well. I actually have a really funny picture. I don't know if, let me flash it on here. Here's a picture from way back in the day of Masai Ujiri, Jeff Weltman, and a very young Bobby Webster, and they were scouting Ben Simmons. I believe it was in high school. It was a high school, or no, that was at LSU. So that's a picture of those three from. It's a throwback Thursday type of thing, right? So, anyways, moving on here to Mason Plumlee. So again, like I don't see a huge gap between Naz Reid, Mason Plumlee, and Jakob Poeltl, but some GM out there who's really deep into the stats might. I really don't like Christian Wood, and honestly, like I think he should be like in a, send him to China, or send him to Turkey range. But nevertheless, rotation tier. So you have like, if so okay, I just want to put this into context. If the Raptors had not made the trade, and also insult to injury, look at number 11. May I just remind you that the Raptors waived this guy for nothing? Waived him. That's a guy that you got back from the Spurs in the Goran Dragic trade, and instead of keeping him, and I was very excited that they got him. I was like, oh my God, this is great. You get Thaddeus Young and Drew Eubanks. Drew Eubanks is awesome. His analytics scream off the charts. He's been really good. He's a good rim protector. And then boom, like 12 seconds later, I think the Raptors Twitter page says, welcome Drew Eubanks. And then like 5 minutes later, it's like Drew Eubanks is waived. And I was like, what? Why? We need this guy. He's better than Khem Birch. And yes, he is better than Khem Birch. So chalk this up as like another, thing that I probably should have talked about yesterday as mishaps by the Raptors. I mean, you had this guy and you just lost him for nothing. Anyways, point being, in terms of backup bigs, I really like him. I liked sort of his impact. I'm not saying he's a star or anything, but I like his sort of low usage rim protection. Like it's a good thing. Um, so yeah, so he's an unrestricted free agent. Dwight Powell obviously has been linked to the Raptors forever. Thomas Bryant, right? I think he's a little bit overrated personally. You get Jack Landell, Bismack Biyombo, Metu, Kevin Love, Blake Griffin. So not, the greatest in this tier, but you start looking at like sort of the next tier of centers, like right after this, and that's when you start to get into like, there's some depth here. Xavier Tillman, like we just saw what he did last night for the Memphis Grizzlies. He was great. I mean, he might be putting himself into a really good place. Obviously, there's Mo Wagner, an unrestricted free agent. You have Paul Reed, Jackson Hayes, and Omer Yurtseven for the Miami Heat. They're all restricted free agents. I don't know if those teams what they will want to do to keep them. Cody Zeller, right? Luka Garza is a restricted free agent. Montrezl Harrell. Sorry, I don't know why I called him Montrezl Harrell. Goga Batiste, I really liked parts of what I saw from him in Indiana, so that was pretty good. And Willie Cauley-Stein, Dwayne Dedman, right? So there's a lot of like you call them like let's call them depth guys, like third center, second center type of crack in case you need to like kind of like the Kem Birch level that the Raptors used to like spend $6 million and they spent their mid-level exception on. I think a lot of those guys are Kem Birch level players. Like they're big bodies you can put in the paint and like take a few fouls on Joel Embiid if you're really worried about that, or to just get center depth. I don't see why you need any of those guys personally, but I'm just saying like for teams that already have starting centers or are very committed to playing a certain style of basketball, which is centerless, like where the Raptors were going with Division 6-9, I don't see like why they're bringing in Jakob Poeltl. You got to ask yourself, like, how many teams out there value him enough to not only use like multiple years of cap space on him, but also like to play a non-shooter in the NBA, in the modern NBA. So you could look at the market of all these players and say, it might have softened a lot. So now we'll get to some comments and then we will exit this live as quickly as we started it. I like Omer. Yeah, man, he's been really good in bits. Um, Plumlee, not as good a defender, but kind of in the um, same category offensively. Mo Wagner, Tillman. I mean, there's some young options. I don't see how you don't re-sign Jakob Poeltl after giving up all of that for him, though. I really don't. And he is better than all of those players that I just referenced. So I understand the marginal upgrade, but he's not that much better. Um, so yeah, so like, I mean, let me know in the comments below once this video goes live, like what you would do given all of these situations. I think, and this is also the complication with the sign and trade element, right? Like every single time someone brings up a sign and trade for Fred or Gary or Jakob or whatever, right? You're like, oh, you just sign and trade them. And that's the problem, right? Like if you sign these guys to the contract that they want, right? Ideally, you're signing and trading them because they came in more expensive than what you were asking for, right? Like, I mean, that makes sense, right? Somebody else is offering them more than you're willing to offer them, and therefore they want the sign and trade. Okay. So let's say you want Gary, I don't know, Fred back at 26. He doesn't want 26. He wants 32. He says, sign and trade me to the Lakers. Well, now the Lakers have to send you back 28 to $27 million of salary just to match, right? Like with the outgoing salary. So in the end of the day, you're in the exact same cap situation as you were in before, which is tax, right? So outright renouncing a guy or doing some cap cleaning and trading away Chris Boucher and Otto Porter potentially for something. But it's, again, even then you have to take back salary, right? Do you see what I mean? Like, like you're going to trade Chris Boucher and what to the Spurs for a second or something like that, right? But like, why are the Spurs doing that? Is Chris Boucher that overvalued? Like, you have to give people assets. You can't just give them liabilities. Chris Boucher did not have a great season. See, this is what I'm talking about. This comment right here, not to pick on you, but sorry, here. Sign and trade Jakob, cut your losses. Why? Why? So, what are you signing and trading him for? Like, what are you getting back? Right? Because assuming that a team doesn't have to give you salary back, then they can sign him himself. So, why are they giving you anything? This is like the whole let's get a pick back for Nick Nurse. Why? No one is giving you a pick for this guy. He doesn't have multiple years left on his contract. Everyone knows you probably don't want him. If you wanted him, you'd have to re-sign him. He's not coaching with 1 year left on his contract, so you're going to re-sign him. People are going to call your bluff. You're not getting anything back, right? There's nobody that desperate for Nick Nurse to be like, oh, here, take some second round picks. I think we as fans need to adjust our expectations in terms of what is actually possible and look at it from the other side of the perspective too. You know, like look at it from the other team's perspective. Why are teams giving you like picks for a player on a sign and trade and no salary back when they could have signed them themselves? You think teams just hate draft picks, right? Like they're just going to give it to you, right? There's no reason to do that. Absolutely none, right? Even the Kyle Lowry sign and trade was a very odd situation because it was basically Kyle just held them to the fire, right? Like they wanted Precious Achiuwa. I think there was some tampering there for sure. Both sides agreed to it. Obviously, Goran Dragic got kind of caught became a casualty, of that trade. But it was a sort of specific situation in which Kyle asked just for enough that they would have to execute the sign and trade. And that's exactly where you are, right? So if you have a team like the Orlando Magic, and let's say they bring back all their guys and they refuse to waive all those guys, and then they have $19 million. Now it's like, okay, we only have 19. Fred wants 27. So let's trade away, I don't know, like a $20 million asset or $20 million worth of assets for Fred VanVleet. Now you can potentially get a sign and trade done. And in that case, it might be a Jonathan Isaac plus, I don't know, a draft pick, like a future pick or something for Fred VanVleet, right? But why do they do that? Just waive Jonathan Isaac. You don't have to give up anything. Just waive Jonathan Isaac, take the non-guaranteed money, and sign Fred VanVleet out. Like it doesn't make any sense. So I'm just saying, like the sign and trade stuff is definitely overblown. I don't know who keeps blowing that out there, but I'd be very surprised if the Raptors get a sign and trade done for Gary or Fred or Jakob. And I would also be very surprised if all three are back if no one significant is traded. The elephant in the room we have not explored in any of these situations is the obvious one, which is trade your freaking highest paid player, which is Pascal Siakam. If you trade Pascal Siakam to one of these teams with a little bit of cap space, specifically one team that has a little bit of cap space, where the hell is it? That would probably fit Pascal Siakam really well is the Utah Jazz, right? The Utah Jazz or the OKC Thunder. Making a trade for Pascal to actually any of these teams really do fit him. The Spurs fit him too. If you were to trade Pascal for something like Keldon Johnson and multiple firsts, maybe even get your first back, right? Or I don't know, like that would help you clear some cap space very easily as well. So I don't know. Even the Rockets, the Rockets could be a prime candidate to trade for Pascal Siakam. You look at the power forward market. If Draymond Green is a top power forward in the market is soft. So Pascal Siakam's trade market could heat up if teams are looking to fill up that 4 spot. So I could see a team like the Pacers. I mean, basically every single team with cap space could be a team that would be interested in Pascal Siakam. They could literally all use him. So, depending on how teams feel about him right now, I think that's one thing you could do to probably clear some space off your books, especially going forward if OG is, in your cards long term, and he definitely should be. His contract going up to 33 million is just going to extend this from cap hell to cap like hell beyond your wildest beliefs or beyond your wildest dreams. I apologize. I haven't been paying as much attention to the chat as I usually try to. I'm just, man, there's a lot of comments. Try to get through these really quick. How crazy would it be to suck up Duncan Robinson's salary plus draft picks? Someone mentioned the other day about what if we traded Now this would be interesting. 1 year of Kyle Lowry for a re-signed Fred, and then we took back draft picks as compensation for the upgrade. That would be interesting. Um, that would be interesting. I don't know, impulsivity. I mean, look, it's messy right now. Can you imagine if the Raptors had actually had a good season? You would go from, oh, it's really, really hard to keep these guys to it's actually impossible, literally, to keep these guys. Um, yeah, but he's owed 29 point I think he's owed $29.9 million next year. That's a lot of money to even just tie up for a year in which you can't afford to be bad. Injuries, there's been a lot of situations. I don't think Kyle Lowry really helps you win right now on the court. Off the court, definitely. Um, but yeah, I mean, it would definitely be a welcome thing for the fans, right? Like I think fans who are pretty sour on Fred VanVleet would be really happy to have him back. Look, it's if you bring back all of these guys, right, then the writing is on the wall. OG or Siakam will eventually have to be moved at some point down the line, unless you intend on becoming the modern day Golden State Warriors. In terms of tax, you cannot afford to keep all of these guys, and I'm saying it like very boldly. You just can't. And there's always this idea that the teams have when they start getting themselves into cap hell, which is, oh, worst case scenario, we'll just trade one of these guys. But the problem is once you operate like as a tax paying team over the cap, everyone knows that you're trying to clear cap space and they're not just going to let you do it. So you usually end up having to move off of picks in order to clear the cap space. And typically speaking, in any NBA trade, what goes out must come in. Like you do have to be able to so the two types of trades that could possibly be done to clear cap space. Number one, the type of trade is the term trade. So, you have a guy on your books for 3 years, right? At 20 million a year for 3 years. You're facing a huge tax bill the next year if he stays on your books. So you move off, say, a future pick right now to take on an expiring contract who makes 20 million. Kind of like the Goran Dragic thing, right? Goran Dragic was an expiring. Kyle Lowry was signed and traded, etc. So there's that type of trade. Then there is the, outright dump, right? There is the, hey, we have cap space to absorb, we have like 8 million, 9 million under the cap or whatever. We can give you $10 million in contract, take $20 million off your books. And, we just want like a couple of seconds and a pick swap for it. In every single case, though, you're giving up some sort of compensation for that, right? So you can't really afford to, yeah, this is such a weird situation that the Raptors have gotten themselves into. There's obviously a lot of smart people in this front office. I really hope they have a better solution than I was able to figure out because I'm not paid millions of dollars to manage a basketball team and I have no idea what I would do in this situation. Because you have the gun to your head. You can't be bad next year. You obviously have these three players who are headlining, quite frankly, a very weak class. And as players at their positions, especially Kyrie Irving specifically, Austin Reeves potentially, I don't know, like Draymond, guys like this, once they start to resign, and I don't think Draymond is going to resign us. I think Draymond is going to be, a free agent. So, I mean, those teams that I mentioned, like, which one of those teams could be looking at Draymond, right? Maybe an OKC, thinking like, hey, let's bring some championship experience and some veteran experience to, whip these young guys into shape. I would personally laugh my ass off if Draymond Green and Fred VanVleet ended up on the same team. I think they would be perfect for each other. I think they are just kindred spirits who belong together. They belong in the same locker room. That's what I'll say. Anyways, guys, take care. Have a great one. My girlfriend is coming back from Nicaragua. I got to clean the house and get some groceries. So yeah, that Scotty video that I referenced earlier will be coming out tomorrow. It's a good one. It's a really good one. I think it's a little bit artsy and, yeah, it's pretty cool. I've mentioned it before. I started a film festival in 2017. After 2 years of virtual screenings, man, it's a really cool film festival. Obviously, the Pendance Film Festival is awesome, and it was one of the fastest growing film festivals in the world prior to, the COVID shutdown in 2020. Right before we ended up, right before basically we ended up putting on the screening, which was February 20th to 23rd, the entire world was starting to shut down. Conferences were shutting down everywhere. Festivals are shuttering down. And we faced a huge surge of people bailing out last second and people just not, people having to cancel their travel plans and all that stuff. So we were in a bit of a financial pickle. It was the most ambitious festival we'd ever put on. And effectively, we had to put it on anyway. We had to eat the cost of all the hotel bills, the airline flights and stuff like that. So and then 2 years we were virtual. So 2 years we were just virtual screenings on a computer. That's not theater. That's not what we wanted to do. So I'm really happy that on May 12th to 14th, we're going to go live. We're going to be back in Toronto. So you want to come meet me at the red carpet? You want to sit in the cinema and watch basketball? Not basketball, sorry. Watch cinema, watch comedy, watch, all horror films, watch all this stuff with, a Raptor content creator. By all means, I will put the link tomorrow when the video drops. There'll be a link for tickets and passes. I hope you'll come out. I hope you'll support. All right, guys, take care and have a good one. Peace.